Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your attendance today. Kenny Chu, former Conservative member of Stevenson, Richmond East, testified twice at committee. I believe they were both the Ethics Committee. First time he appeared, March 31st, 2023, he didn't provide any specifics other than to make a very bold statement saying that foreign meddling, particularly from Beijing China, played a role in his defeat. The Liberal candidate, MP Parm Baines, who won the election, was spoken to by the press afterwards. He was asked whether or not foreign interference played a role in his election. He was very emphatic by saying, no, not at all, while simply walking away from the cameras. Again, Mr. Chu did not provide any specifics in relation to Mr. Baines. He did, however, do that on April the 30th, 2024. He said as follows, "Let me introduce my former opponent. In my view, his ascent to power was paved with disinformation. Perhaps it was through a calculated strategy, or at the very least, he was a willing participant in a now proven disinformation campaign. He willingly embraced and propagated accusations targeting Conservatives, including our then leader Aaron O'Toole and me, accusing Conservatives of racism and of harboring anti-Asian sentiments. Exploitive and manipulative, these allegations linked to foreign states reverberated through biased media channels and chat groups. He publicly pledged, this is Mr. Baines, to the Chinese audience that he would not support a foreign influence registry. This promise directly contradicted the then Minister of Public Safety through his announcements back in 2022 and 2023. During my intervention, I asked for more specifics. He said, from what I gathered, Mr. Baines propagated and elevated and amplified this misinformation by attending radio interviews and community events where he publicly announced that he wasn't going to support what he called this anti-Asian foreign interference registry. There was zero clarification as to what exactly Bill C-282, which I had proposed, would have done. There was no mention of any country whatsoever. The fact is that it was to inject transparency into political lobbying activities, but the subtleties and intricacies were not clarified during those opportunities. By doing that, and by not helping me to clarify my character, he perpetrated and continued the assassination attempts. Very specific language. Was that relayed to CSIS?
As you can imagine, CSIS does follow the media, as most Canadians do. For the specific question that you're asking about, the unclassified summaries of these incidents that was released by us as part of the Pi-Fi Commission does speak to this, and I think I would also stress that the panel of 5 for both federal elections did make a determination that the detection of foreign interference did not threaten Canada's ability to have a free and fair election that warranted public communication.
I'm not challenging that. I'm simply asking, did he share those specifics of what I read out to you? Did he complain about that to CSIS during the 2021 campaign, yes or no?
I am not personally aware of that.
Thank you. Chair, at this time I'm moving a motion. I believe Madam Clerk has received it via email in both official languages.
Okay, go ahead.
I have several copies for distribution, which I can pass to the clerk.
Just why don't you read your motion, Mr. Brock?
Thank you. The motion reads that as part of the study agreed to by members of the committee, or agreed to by the committee on February 13th, 2024, the study be extended to examine the actions of the MP of Stevenson, Richmond East during the 2021 election.
Okay. Just for clarity, how many meetings are you looking to do here, Mr. Brock, that might
I
help the
would say
committee?
probably 1 to 2 meetings would suffice.
Okay. I'm going to, the motion is in order. It's in relation to the study. I'm going to, have you distributed that, Madam Clerk, to? So, okay, I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Brock, but I'm going to suspend for a minute so that, Mr. Kirk, I see your hand. I'm going to suspend for a minute so that members of the committee can have this motion. I'm going to ask our witnesses if they can just stay where they are. Perhaps we can dispose of this quickly, but just I'm going to suspend for a minute to give just for the benefit of the committee, Mr. Brock, I do need to seek clarification whether you're asking for, we need to ask.
I'm going to err on the side of caution and ask for 2 meetings, Chair.
Okay, so you're going to ask for up to 2 meetings, okay. Just because you know we like working on timelines and,
Yes.
and being very specific. So the motion has been moved. Mr. Brock, you have the floor, and I see, right now, the list that I've got is Brock, Couric, Khalid, and Baines, okay?
Sorry, Chair, if you want to switch Baines and Khalid, that would be awesome.
Okay, so Baines, Khalid, and I saw your hand, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher? Okay. I don't expect that we're going to get through this quickly, given the list that we have. So I'm going to thank Ms.
Just a point of order, Chair.
Okay, so we'll see how far this goes. I'm going to ask for your patience, please. Okay, so I'm going to go to Mr. Brock to start. Mr. Brock, you have the floor.
Thank
On the motion.
Just a point of order, Chair, before
Point of order, Mr. Couric.
the witnesses had mentioned, I believe they had printed off some information, just regardless of what happens for the rest of the meeting. I'm just asking, Chair, if maybe you could ensure that members can get the information that the witnesses referred to. And I believe there's some packages. I can see some there. I believe those are the ones that were referred to, just if we can make sure that committee members do in fact get them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kirk. I'm going to make sure that the clerk looks after that. Thank you. Mr. Brock, you have the floor on the motion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm mindful of the comments of my colleague, Ms. Khalid, in terms of having these witnesses present. I'm very doubtful that I will be in a position to cede my opportunity of speaking on this motion within the next 40 minutes, which I believe will be coinciding with the ringing of the bells. But nevertheless, things could change. In any event, should my motion pass, I'll just offer this as an observation. Clearly, key witnesses of my particular motion will involve members of CSIS and very likely Ms. Giles and Mr. Bassler to get into more specifics as to how Mr. Baines furthered and propagated the disinformation essentially or originating from Beijing, China. And it really begs the question that if it happened in that particular riding, did it happen in other mainland BC ridings? We do know that other members of the Conservative Party have levied accusations of foreign interference. And I've heard and read of those accusations on a very general level. And I think some of those former members have actually testified at committee as to how they felt foreign meddling and foreign interference, particularly from Beijing, China, altered their fairness, their perception of fairness in the 2021 election and in some cases the 2019 election. I think what I can say as a fact, and I believe is the position of CSIS and certainly the position of our former Conservative leader, Aaron O'Toole, and certainly the position of the Prime Minister and the government, that regardless of the interference, the results of the election were sustained, that there was integrity, that it would not have altered the composition of government. Our former leader, Aaron O'Toole, has surmised that, in his opinion, interference had affected the outcome in at least eight ridings. I know of one in central Ontario and several in British Columbia. So I think it's incumbent that this particular committee on this particular study expand its ambit to really do an in-depth review and examination by hearing from various experts in this matter as to why and how the message of misinformation and disinformation was amplified and used specifically against conservative members. Now, I take, for example, the former member, Kenny Chu. And as I indicated in my opening question to the CSIS members, Mr. Chu testified twice. And the first time he testified, he just talked about his perceptions that foreign interference impacted the outcome without naming anybody. I was part of that particular committee hearing, and I was intrigued by listening to his testimony. There was an intervention by my colleague, Mr. Villemure. He may not remember this, but I'm sure he does, where he actually opened up a thought during one of his interventions as to whether or not Mr. Baines is now in a conflict of interest, sitting at that committee, specifically hearing about his riding and the interference that happened in his riding, where he took absolutely no steps to correct the misinformation and disinformation, but did something even further, which I think undermines the character of Mr. Baines, by amplifying that, by taking that wrong, incorrect message and using it for purely partisan reasons. And it's appalling. As a parliamentarian, we come to this position, we come to this office, we come to Ottawa maintaining integrity, honesty, and character. I believe in the concept of fair play. I teach that to my children. Taking advantage of someone's miscues is not acceptable. In this case, taking advantage of a foreign entity, a foreign enemy, a communist government who wanted to maintain diplomatic relations with the Liberal government of Canada. Notwithstanding, at that time, we had two Michaels, two Canadian citizens who were wrongly detained. We have evidence from many members of the PRC stationed here in Canada openly bragging and supporting the concept that their foreign interference worked. They got the outcome that they wanted. They got the Liberal government in power again. They got their position where a prime minister says one thing to the public and does a complete opposite in reality. The prime minister talks about the integrity of this country, how our elections need to be fair and transparent, and that we have mechanisms in place to deal with foreign interference. Well, so clearly those mechanisms failed miserably. But what does it say to the Canadians who are now listening to my intervention? What does it say about the character of a prime minister who openly, leading up to the 2015 campaign, openly bragged about his admiration of the basic dictatorship in China? We are a democratic nation. I couldn't think of anything worse from a potential prime minister who's admiring the suppression of human rights, the illegal detention of its own citizens, the execution of its own citizens. Think of Tiananmen Square and the aftermath of that debacle on the world stage. And our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was very proud of the administration in China for exercising those abuses. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. But it runs deep into his family because his father admired basic dictatorships. His father admired China. His father admired Cuba. His brother admired that as well. When we heard from his brother, Alexandre Trudeau, at committees studying the Trudeau Foundation issue, it was very clear that he has been on a number of trips to China and welcomed by the government of China. And it's clear from all the evidence that I have heard that there is no special relationship that China has than with its current relationship with the Liberal government here in Canada, particularly the Prime Minister. I take a look as well in sort of the genesis behind this motion, Mr. Chair, to take a look at all the overt attempts by Justin Trudeau and his government to avoid having any study, having any inquiry, having any thorough examination to what extent foreign interference played in the 2019 and 2021 elections. Take a look at all the times when these issues would come up, and of course the Liberal members would exercise all its tools to avoid any sort of study, any further examination. We take a look at the Prime Minister himself, who says one thing about the integrity of elections and the fairness of elections, but when it comes to scrutinizing the actions of himself and the government, there's nothing to see here, Canadians. Just trust us. Just trust us that we have a robust system in place to detect, to flag, to suppress the influence of our enemies, to keep our elections fair and square. But when it comes time to asking repeatedly, as Conservatives did, supported by the Bloc, to ask for a full inquiry into all the circumstances, we were met with the complete opposite from this government. And only to the very last opportunity did Justin Trudeau finally accede to the will of Parliament and asking for sunlight on this issue. What did he do before that? Well, he hired his special rapporteur, someone who had the most respect of all Canadians, someone whose judgment we would not dispute for 1 minute. And to that I say, yes. Yes, our former Governor General has that position in history. He's earned it. He is a man of integrity. He has served this nation very well. And in fact, anecdotally, he was the former president of my university at Waterloo. A lawyer, a law professor, a dean. And that's what bothered me when I was invited, and I was privileged to be invited, to committees where David Johnston actually had to testify and defend his initial report. I say initial because he ultimately resigned before he tabled his final report. But to all the lawyers sitting on this committee, on the question of conflict of interest and bias, it's not only real bias or real conflict of interest, it's the perception of a conflict of interest. And when we had evidence, which evidence still exists, that there was a close familial relationship with our former Governor General and the Trudeau family. They lived fairly close to each other. They vacationed with each other. They dined with each other. It raised, from a legal perspective, the perception of conflict. And when I had an opportunity of raising these issues directly with the Governor General, former Governor General, I was actually surprised as a lawyer and listening to his understanding of the conflict that it wasn't an issue to him. And I understand it's not an issue to him, but it certainly was an issue to Canadians. And it was an issue for parliamentarians, that a conflict does not abate over time. It still exists. And of all the esteemed and learned, remarkable men and women who have served this country well in various positions, why did we have to choose David Johnston, given the baggage that existed between he and Justin Trudeau's family?
Mr. Brock, I'm
Yes.
going to just ask you to pause. You still have the floor. 12:05 would have been the normal time that this panel would have ended, and I would have been dismissing the witnesses. So I'm going to, given the list that I have, and the... So you want them to stay?
I would appreciate that. I know,
I've got a speaking list on this motion.
Right.
So
it's
let
unfortunate.
me defer to the witnesses. Mr. Basler and Ms. Giles, are you able to stay while the committee? Okay,
Proposal of the committee, Mr.
wonderful.
Chair.
That's all I need to know. Go ahead, Mr. Brock, you still have the floor.
So I was talking about my interventions when our Governor General appeared and his defense of his report. So leaving aside the conflict issue, because I think I made my point on that, he didn't see it the way that parliamentarians, particularly in opposition, and Canadians saw it, that there was an actual and a perceived conflict of interest. Did it come to anyone's surprise across Canada that his recommendations and his conclusions?
Sorry, Mr. Brock,
Yes?
to interrupt you again. I see that the bells have begun ringing.
What do you see from our side, Chair?
You see
To resume.
No, there's no UC here.
to resume?
Yeah, to continue.
Oh, to
with,
continue, okay,
yeah.
sorry.
There's no UC here.
Okay, so I don't have UC. I don't have
I think it is
UC.
very, very important.
And
I
voting
don't
is
have
also important as
UC.
well.
I don't have
But
UC,
you
Ms.
don't need
Khalid.
30 minutes to
I don't have
vote.
UC, so we are
Right.
going to suspend the meeting until the votes, and then we're going to return. Thank you.
Can we go for 20 minutes? That we still have time to go vote?
Yeah.
I need UC, Mr. Fisher. Those are the rules.
The concern is they're not giving UC on their own
Miss
motion.
Khalid, we don't have UC. Doesn't matter who gives it. We don't have UC, so the meeting is suspended.